I used to be the very picture of success in everyone's eyes. Before 2008, my life was like a meticulously choreographed film. I owned a modest but highly regarded consulting firm, housed in a Midtown Manhattan office overlooking the bustling streets below. We provided market strategy services to mid-sized companies, enjoying a stable of clients and a solid reputation. I was married to my college sweetheart, Sarah, a talented gallery curator. We lived in a spacious Upper West Side apartment, the glittering surface of the Hudson River just outside our window. Our life was filled with art, dinner parties with friends, and shared plans for the future. Perhaps a move to the suburbs, a house with a white picket fence, a golden retriever, and 2 kids. I thought this was the complete script for my life, a solid, bright, superhighway to the American dream. I had always prided myself on my rationality and self-discipline. I ran 5 kilometers every morning, drank my coffee black, and read the Wall Street Journal. I believed success was born from hard work and precise calculations, not from ethereal luck. I held a kind of condescending pity for those who indulged in lotteries or casinos, seeing them as weak-willed souls incapable of mastering their own destinies. I never could have imagined that a global financial tsunami would be the first wave to breach my own personal dam. In the autumn of 2008, the shadow of Lehman Brothers collapse loomed over all of Wall Street, and the chill trickled down to small business owners like me. Clients began slashing budgets, projects were shelved indefinitely, and for the first time, my firm's cash flow grew tight. It was on one of those uncertain evenings that I got a call from my old college friend, Kevin. He invited me to his apartment in Brooklyn for a house party to unwind. Kevin's apartment was smoky, with a few beer bottles strewn across a table. A meaningless ball game played on the TV, but the real focus was the 3 or 4 people huddled around a laptop in the center of the living room. Their faces were a contorted mix of tension and ecstasy, their voices near shouts. "Banker. Come on, banker again. Damn it, it's player." As I drew closer, I was hit by an odor that was a mixture of adrenaline and cheap hope. On the screen was a lavish, somewhat tacky virtual casino table. Against a green velvet background, cards were dealt in a slick, animated motion. This was my first time seeing Baccarat. When Kevin saw me, he excitedly threw an arm around my shoulder, his eyes glittering with a light I'd never seen before. "Michael, you gotta see this. This thing is a damn money printer," he said, pointing to the betting area on the screen. "The rules are dead simple. You either bet on the banker to win or the player to win. It's almost a 50-50 shot. A hell of a lot more reliable than the damn stock market." I instinctively frowned, the sense of superiority deep within me making me scoff at the idea. "Kevin, don't be a fool. The house always wins." "No, no, no," he said, wagging a finger like he was sharing a secret. "This is an online platform. They give you rebates to attract customers, and you can use strategy. See, I've been tracking the roadmap. It's been banker 5 times in a row, so the probability of player coming up next is huge." I looked at his so-called roadmap, a complex chart of red and blue dots, and tried to find some logic in it. Being decent at math, I immediately recognized it as the absurd gambler's fallacy. Every hand was an independent event. But I kept my mouth shut, watching out of politeness. They urged me to try a hand, but I just smiled and declined. What happened next, however, planted a seed in my mind. Within 3 hands, Kevin had won twice, and his account balance had increased by $800. He let out a whoop, immediately transferred the money to his bank card through some payment app, and held up his phone for all of us to see. "See that? Tonight's drinks and dinner are on the casino boss." In that moment, something struck me. It wasn't the $800, but the ease it represented. I spent my days in the office agonizing over contracts worth a few $1,000s, dealing with demanding clients and managing my employees' emotions. And Kevin, with just a few clicks of a mouse, had earned half of my day's income amidst laughter and cheers. I left the party, but that green virtual table was seared into my mind. On the subway ride home, I ignored a text from Sarah asking how I was, and instead opened my phone's browser and typed in the words "online Baccarat." When I got home, Sarah was already asleep. I sat in my study, in front of my computer, and made a decision that would change my life forever. I told myself I wasn't a gambler like Kevin. I was a shrewd investor. I understood probability. I could control risk. I laid out what seemed like a flawless plan, a daily bankroll of no more than $1,500. The moment my profit hits $500, I stop immediately. No chasing wins. That way, I can make an extra $15,000 a month, more than enough to cover the losses from my company's downturn. I used a backup credit card to register an account and deposited $1,500. My palms were sweating slightly, and when I placed my first bet, my heart was nearly pounding out of my chest. I bet $100 on Banker and watched as the virtual cards were revealed one by one. Banker had 9, player had 6. I won. The screen flashed plus $95 after a 5% commission. In that instant, an indescribable thrill, a sense of absolute control washed over me. It was more direct, more stimulating than the satisfaction of closing a big contract. For the next hour, I stuck strictly to my discipline. There were wins and losses, but my balance trended upward through the fluctuations. When my account hit $2,015, I was up $515. I took a deep breath and forced myself to close the browser. I had done it. I had beaten the system and my own human greed. I walked into the living room, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and felt like the king of Wall Street. This was the beginning of my downfall. That so-called honeymoon period lasted for about a month. Like the most dedicated employee, I secretly went about my work every day. Sometimes it was in the early morning while Sarah was still fast asleep, when I would slip into the study. Sometimes it was during my lunch break, with my office door locked. Other times, late at night, I'd pretend I was still catching up on emails. I created a sophisticated Excel spreadsheet to track my daily wins, losses, bankroll, and turnover. The charts and data further convinced me that I was engaged in a controllable investment. The money won from gambling began to seep into my life like a silent venom. When Sarah admired an expensive piece of art, I bought it anonymously the next day and had it delivered to her gallery, savoring her surprised expression while lying that it was from a forgotten company receivable that had finally come through. I bought myself a pricey Swiss watch, showing it off to friends as proof of my keen investment eye. I even started using gambling to reimburse my daily expenses. A fancy dinner with friends tonight? No problem, I'll just hop on the site and win back the $200. The feeling was intoxicating. It was as if I had an inexhaustible ATM, a magic wand that could erase any bill. However, the world of lies I had so carefully constructed was built on quicksand. I started to look down on the fools who lost money. On various gambling forums, I postured as an expert, pontificating on bankroll management and emotional control, basking in the praise of others. I didn't realize that the casino welcomes no one more than self-proclaimed smart guys like me. They aren't afraid of you winning. In fact, they're happy to let you win. Every victory reinforces that fatal self-confidence, setting you up to lose even more in the future. The turning point came without warning in the second month. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and as usual, I was trying to hit my $500 quota within half an hour. But on that day, it felt as if the entire system was conspiring against me. I bet on banker, it dealt player. I switched to player, and it immediately dealt banker. My $1,500 bankroll evaporated in no time. Logic told me to do what I always did, close the browser and come back tomorrow. But a scorching sense of indignation and anger seized me. This was the first time I broke my own rule. I just need to win my money back, I told myself. I lost $1,500. I'll deposit another $1,500. One big win is all it takes. I deposited the money again, but the result was the same. My betting amounts began to spiral out of control, from $100 a hand to $500, then to $1,000. My eyes were glued to the screen, my mind a blank slate, with only one thought remaining: get it back. When my business partner called to discuss an important project, I cut him off rudely, saying I was in a meeting. When Sarah texted to ask what I wanted for dinner, I replied with an emotionless whatever. That afternoon, I was like a madman, depositing and losing money over and over until I had maxed out all 3 of my personal credit cards. When the number on the screen finally hit 0, I had lost nearly $40,000. I collapsed into my chair, my shirt soaked with cold sweat. The world was dead silent, save for the hum of the computer's fan. This wasn't an investment. This wasn't strategy. This was naked, stupid gambling. For the first time, I tasted a fear that ran bone deep. From that day on, everything changed. The discipline of stop at a $500 profit became stop once I've recovered yesterday's losses. My Excel spreadsheet was abandoned. It no longer chronicled victories, but milestones on the road to hell. I started embezzling my company's liquid assets, swearing to myself before every transfer that this was the last time, that I would put the money back as soon as I won. But the money vanished like stones tossed into a black hole, creating no echo. My company began to fall apart. I missed important client meetings, and the proposals I submitted were riddled with errors. My employees started whispering among themselves. My partner and longtime friend, David, pulled me aside more than once, asking with concern if something was wrong at home. I deflected with a web of lies, claiming my father was sick or that I was under immense stress. My relationship with Sarah also hit a red flag. I became irritable, quick to anger, and perpetually distracted. She would excitedly share stories from the gallery, and I, fuming over a hand I had just lost, would snap at her. When she asked about the company's struggles, I remained tight-lipped. The distance between us widened, imperceptibly at first, like the expanse of the Hudson River itself. In just 6 months, I had transformed from a confident, successful man into a debt-ridden gambler. The company accounts were drained, and we were on the brink of bankruptcy. I was over $200,000 in debt from credit cards, personal loans, and worst of all, the company's tax reserves that I should never have touched. I had run out of road. It was either confess to Sarah and most likely lose her in my marriage, or I didn't dare think about the alternative. Ultimately, I chose to ask my parents for help. I drove to their old house on Long Island, where I grew up. There, a 40-year-old man, I knelt before them and cried like a lost child. I told them everything, from that party and the green felt table to the bottomless pit of debt. My father, a quiet, retired engineer, trembled with rage. He raised his hand, but in the end, couldn't bring himself to strike me. My mother just held me, her tears soaking my shoulder. To save my marriage and prevent my life from being utterly destroyed, my parents gave me their entire life savings. They even sold off some of their retirement investments and humbled themselves to borrow money from their siblings, my aunts and uncles. They scraped together enough to pay off my debts. The entire family mobilized to create a colossal lie, telling Sarah that my company had gone bankrupt due to a bad investment by my partner, and that my parents' money was to help me start over. Though heartbroken, Sarah chose to believe and stand by me. I closed the company and dissolved the partnership. I swore I would never touch gambling again. For the next few years, I struggled to get back on track. I found a job as a floor manager at a large department store. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. Sarah and I moved into a smaller apartment, and our life became simpler. I thought I had emerged from that nightmare, that the experience would remain a permanent scar, a reminder of my past foolishness. However, I had severely underestimated the power of psychological addiction. Quitting gambling was far harder than I ever imagined. Fast forward to 2015. Smartphones had become extensions of our bodies. One day during my lunch break, I saw a young colleague staring intently at his phone screen. I glanced over unintentionally, and the familiar green table with its red and blue road map hit me like a taser to the heart. It was Baccarat. Seeing me, my colleague excitedly waved me over. "Michael, come take a look. How should I play this streak? You're experienced." The blood in my veins felt like it had instantly ignited. I forced myself to remain calm and offered my advice. He took it and won. He won over $1,000 that day and, in his excitement, treated the whole department to drinks that night. Amidst the cheers, he clapped me on the shoulder and called me a stock market guru. In that moment, the demon that had been dormant inside me for 7 years opened its eyes. "I'm not the same man I was 7 years ago," a voice whispered in my head. "I've been through failure. I know all the traps. This time I can control it. I just want to win back a little of the money my parents paid for me to lighten their burden." This seemingly noble reason became the perfect excuse for my relapse. That night, using Sarah's laptop, because I had formatted my own countless times, I registered a new account. I told myself I would only play with $100. However, the fall from a relapse is much faster and more brutal than the first. There was no honeymoon period. It was as if the casino had flagged me as a returning customer, ready for a direct harvest. My self-control was no match for the intense desire to chase my old losses. I remember one time, stubbornly betting on Banker, only to watch the screen deal 15 consecutive player hands. I watched my account balance dwindle from thousands to zero, and finally, staring at the phone screen, I ran to the bathroom and dry-heaved. I became even more frantic, chasing bets with higher odds like the 8-1 payout for a tie or the 11-1 for a pair. These outcomes always seemed to pop up when I wasn't betting on them, but as soon as I placed a heavy wager, they would vanish as if by conspiracy, not reappearing for dozens of hands until, after I had lost my last cent, one would mockingly appear on the screen. This time, I had no company to embezzle from, no savings to burn through. I opened 9 new credit cards and applied for every high-interest online loan I could find. Like a ravenous vampire, I began borrowing from everyone around me, from new colleagues to old friends, fabricating all sorts of excuses. My kids' tuition, a family emergency, a short-term investment opportunity. In just 1 year, I had created another black hole of debt, this time exceeding $300,000. My spirit was completely dead. I locked myself in the employee break room at the department store for 3 days and 3 nights, telling Sarah I had to go out of state for an urgent training seminar. For those 3 days, I didn't eat or sleep, just paced like a caged animal in that tiny space. My mind had only one thought: how do I win it all back? There was only one answer: find a large sum of money, make one last bet. Either I would soar to the heavens or be utterly destroyed. My gaze eventually fell upon the person I should never have harmed. Mr. Henderson, our old family neighbor for many years, was a kind, retired teacher. He had watched me grow up and had even tutored me in math when I was a boy. He had an almost fatherly trust in me. I dressed neatly, armed with a fake investment proposal for a high-tech agriculture project that I had forged overnight, and knocked on his door. Using all the salesmanship I had honed in my consulting days, I painted him a picture of a magnificent future, promising a 30% return within 6 months. Mr. Henderson looked at me, at the boy next door he had always seen as so bright and successful, and didn't have a single doubt. He gave me the $150,000 he had saved for his retirement. Holding that check, my hands trembled. It was half from the feverish anticipation of being able to bet again, and half from the bone-chilling cold of betraying his trust. But the gambler in me had long since conquered the man who still had a conscience. I deposited the money into my account, and then began the final, desperate frenzy. It was a 48-hour journey through hell. I never left the screen. My eyes were bloodshot, and I felt as if my very soul had been drained. The money cascaded from my account like a digital waterfall. To keep a high roller like me playing, the site kept giving me meager 0.4% rebates, but it was like trying to hydrate a dying man with a drinking straw. 2 days later, on an all-in bet where I pushed my entire balance, the screen revealed the very result I dreaded. Account balance, $0. In that moment, the world stood still. I grabbed the laptop from the table and, with all my strength, smashed it against the wall. The screen shattered, just like my fragmented life. I collapsed to the floor, unable to make a sound, only a bitter, metallic despair filling my throat. This time, I didn't ask anyone for help. I chose the most cowardly escape. I went home while Sarah was out, wrote a short suicide note, and then swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills. I thought that would be the end, but fate handed me its cruelest judgment. It let me live. Sarah came home early, found me in time, and dragged me back from the clutches of death. Waking up in the sterile white space of the hospital, seeing her swollen, red-rimmed eyes and her face etched with despair, I finally, truly understood. The pain I had caused her was far more terrible than death itself.